So it's been a crazy week for Nintendo with the Switch 2. You have tariffs, postponing of the pre-orders, etc. And I want to break it down for all of you and share my take on why Nintendo is reacting in this way and the complicated business decisions that they are facing now and likely what they're thinking about to kind of navigate this whole situation. So a quick recap. First, US President Trump announces that he's doing a blanket tariff on many different countries, including Japan, which is hit with a 24% levy. Vietnam, for comparison, is 46%, Malaysia at 24%, and the biggest one, China, at the moment is a whopping 105% tariff. Nintendo then announces after that announcement that they are indefinitely putting on hold the pre-order date for Switch 2 until they can figure out how to handle the recent tariff announcements and try to figure out these very complicated environment that they are now in. Then Trump backs off due to pressure in the markets and he puts a 90-day pause on these reciprocal tariffs that go above 10%. So quote-unquote talks can begin. But except for China, they're going to be hit with a 125% tariff and everyone else gets a 90-day grace period except for China. And then the next day he goes and says, nope, for China, it's actually on top of an additional 20% tariff for a grand total of 145% levy. So this is pretty unpredictable stuff that's coming out right now. So the key thing to keep in mind is that the June 5th release date currently remains unchanged, which is just about 2 months away. And there's no beneficial reason why they would change that, because if they did, they would just be sitting on products stuck on the shelves and warehouses, which in itself would lose their money because product that doesn't move still costs money to store. The expenses don't go away, right? So one very possible scenario is that they do decide on increasing the price of the Switch 2 beyond $449, maybe $500, maybe $550. Now you may be thinking that that would be pretty incredibly insane for Nintendo to price it even further, despite all the pushback that they already just got at the $449 price tag for the device and $80 games. And I would say that you are correct to think that, but Nintendo right now has already committed to selling the Switch 2 with the aim of selling each unit at a net profit, right? So if they did decide to do a price hike to soften the PR backlash, they would go on a full-blown public relations crisis mode and as much as possible shift the blame to Trump's tariffs to soften the negative PR that they are going to get. It's not our fault, it's the US's fault, it's Trump's fault, it's the tariffs' fault. But at the end of the day, this is still a losing game for Nintendo because of the two basic economic principles called the price elasticity of demand and the choice of alternatives. So price elasticity is simply the range of prices that can change for a product before you have a effect on the demand of the product, right? So for example, if you price the good too high, you price the product too high, the demand for your product goes down. You price it too low, the demand for your product goes higher. And there's kind of this little bit of a wiggle room where even if you change it within this range, the demand won't change so much, right? And as for a choice, well, simply it's the name as it says, right? Choice is, as a consumer, if we have equally comparable choices, products to choose from, you're going to choose the one that's most economically viable for you, given the alternatives that are made available to you. So what does this mean for Nintendo? Well, essentially, it just means that by increasing the price, Nintendo puts themselves in a position where they can trigger loss of demand. And this is greater amplified because the fact is at $450 at the moment, it is now priced very similar to the PlayStation 5, which is at $450 for the cheapest model, and the Xbox Series S as $500, right? And historically, Nintendo has often priced itself at below Sony and Microsoft's offerings, which is now not the case. And also take in consideration that Nintendo really has sales for their hardware or software, whereas sales often come with huge markdowns for, PlayStation and Xbox. And even if someone did say, well, the Switch is unique because it's portable, it has Mario and, Donkey Kong and Kirby, etc. I would say sure, but the difference today is that in the handheld space, Switch 2 has viable competition such as the Steam Deck, the Asus ROG Ally, and the Lenovo Legion Go. And even if they are priced higher than the Switch 2, which currently they are, the games that you can buy on those devices, on Steam, for example, is just so much cheaper, even at full price, right? And that's not even considering the fact that Steam always has some sort of sales, right? You could buy one Switch game at $80, sure. Or you could buy 3, 4, 5 comparable games, and even more with just $80, right? So Nintendo has put themselves in a position where customers like you and I are able to compare, think, and choose, right? That's not a position where Nintendo really wants, right? They want to be the monopoly, or they want to be the place to where de facto you want to go for their handheld. And Nintendo's competitors are 100% going to take advantage of any sign of weakness that they can smell in pricing and value proposition that they can take advantage of. Now, let's go the other way. What if Nintendo wants to keep the price at $450, right? Well, they still lose because they have to deal with the tariff in some way. Tariffs are paid by the importer, not the exporter typically. And if the importer has to pay the tariff, well, the importer will naturally increase the sale price above MSRP. Which then brings us back to the two economic principles that I mentioned earlier, right? Price elasticity and the choice of alternatives. So if Nintendo wants to have the price be set at $450, Nintendo and its other collaborators, like the manufacturers, for example, are going to have to make some sort of sacrifice that eats into their profit margins. So whatever direction Nintendo goes, Nintendo is going to wait as long as they can before committing, because the policy actions of the US administration right now is just very unpredictable, right? Not just Nintendo, but any company right now is not, you're not going to be able to make very concrete business decisions. So it should be noted that Nintendo actually started preparing for tariffs back in 2019 during Trump's first term, where they actually shifted their production from China over to Vietnam. But as we know, Trump recently put a blanket tariff on Vietnam at 46%. So that plan got shot, right? Even with the 90-day period, there's still a 10% levy, bare minimum 10% levy on all goods from other countries other than China. So brownie points for Nintendo for taking initiative, but unfortunately, bad luck. So what is Nintendo going to do right now? What Nintendo is relying on at this moment is whether or not the Japanese government will be able to navigate the tariff war and some way make a deal with the US to minimize tariffs, right? And it does seem that the Japanese government is making some sort of progress, because earlier this week, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that Japan would get priority treatment towards making a deal to roll back the tariffs. So it's possible that Nintendo somehow gets in the good graces of Trump and he explicitly says that, hey, you know, I like Nintendo, I'm going to exempt Nintendo from the tariffs. But you know, realistically, that's probably not going to happen because, you know, Trump isn't a gamer and he definitely don't care about video games, right? So for sure, what we can expect Nintendo to do is that during this 90-day period, Nintendo is going to ramp up production as much as possible of the Switch 2 device, pump them out, get them made, and ship them over into the US as fast as possible. As of right now, they have shipped about 746,000 units of the Switch 2 into the US, which are immune to tariffs because they are already in the US. But that's only probably going to help them for about a quarter. After that, you know, full-blown tariffs, that whatever they may be at that point, are going to kick in for any new devices that come into US. So whatever Nintendo chooses to do, they're going to lose in some way, and ultimately, we are going to lose. All right, everyone, that's my thoughts on this. I hope it was very insightful for you all. As usual, like, subscribe, and, you know, definitely, most importantly, leave comments below. I want to hear your thoughts about what you think Nintendo should do to navigate this whole scenario and what the outcome could be 90 days from now. Until next time.